Good evening and welcome to the National Writers Series. I'm Jillian Manning, the Executive Director here at NWS, and I'm so pleased to welcome best-selling author Mary Roach back to Traverse City, virtually this time. Mary visited us in 2017 for her book Grunt, The Curious Science of Humans at War. Tonight, America's funniest science writer will be taking us on a different journey through the natural world with her book Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law. The book chronicles humankind's past and present struggles with everything from cougars to danger trees to beans. Yes, beans. Fascinating, witty, and humane, Fuzz offers hope for a compassionate coexistence with our ever-expanding human habitat. We're also thrilled to welcome back to the virtual stage Kendra Carr of Interlochen Public Radio. She's the host of IPR's All Things Considered and Our Global Neighborhood, as well as an actor and an avid reader. We look forward to spending the coming hour with you, and we're thrilled that tonight's event will be simulcast with Interlochen Public Radio to reach across northern Michigan. Please join me in welcoming Mary Roach and Kendra Carr.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm Kendra Carr. Welcome to the National Writers Series. As Jillian said, this event is being simulcast on Zoom and Interlochen Public Radio. So if you wish to participate in the conversation, you can submit questions by registering at nationalwriterseries.org. And with that, I want to welcome our author, Mary Roach. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. It's so nice to be sort of back in Traverse City.
As back as we can. So to start, I wanted to get into, chapter 2, you go right into bears, and Traverse City is still kind of reeling from a bear that was hanging around this summer. They had tried translocating it early, like last year, and then it came back to Traverse City, loved the bird seed, and just came back. And they ended up having to put down the bear. And so, in your book, you talk a little bit about this. When all this stuff started going down, I was not surprised at all because, you had said relocation usually doesn't work, but people don't want to put down bears. Those are both things that you said. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Something like 75% of wildlife agencies will do translocation with a problem bear, and only about 15% of them feel like it's an effective solution, because bears are amazingly good at finding their way back. And this is actually an image you're seeing that I took. That's why it's so crappy and out of focus. This is a bear at 3:30 in the morning in an alley in Aspen, Colorado, and you can see there's a bear head on the lid of that supposedly bear-resistant container. I love the irony here. This bear is dining on some very, very expensive, sustainable, delicious food scraps from a restaurant right there. Bears, when they stumble onto a delicious and plentiful food source in a human environment, they keep coming back. They've learned that this is some good eating, and it's easy to find, and it's dependable, and they don't have to forage. So why wouldn't they? So they keep coming back. And anytime you have people and bears in close proximity, somebody's going to get hurt. Most often it's the bear, because people feel threatened. Somebody, depending on, there's different municipalities have a different kind of a sense of what has crossed a line in terms of public safety. But at any time anybody's hurt, even if it's mildly hurt, like in that very alley just before that picture was taken a couple months back, a restaurateur surprised a bear in a dumpster that hadn't been properly locked, and the bear, there was kind of a scuffle, and the bear bit him on the ass. And that bear was put down, and people were very upset. People, I think they may have picketed the restaurant. They were really upset. So translocation sounds like something, just put him out in the woods where he can't cause any harm, cause any problems. But bears, first of all, they're good at finding their way back. They're also, there's going to be some human settlement probably within walking distance of that bear. And once bears have learned what people mean, i.e. food, easy food, they tend to do the same thing. So the bears get into the same kind of trouble often in another community. And the other problem there is that the agency that moved the bear, should somebody be hurt or killed by this bear that's been relocated, then the agency would be liable, and there, it'd be a fairly sizable lawsuit. When somebody's hurt by a bear and you can pin it on an agency for having either moved a bear or done nothing about a bear, there've been some multi-million-dollar lawsuits in Utah and Arizona. So it's a problem that's hard to solve after bears have gotten used to eating human food. It's better to try to prevent it by locking the container, making sure it's a good bear-resistant container. It's very complicated. I mean, the chapter is really about how something that should be simple is so complex. You have the fact that it's Aspen, Pitkin County, there's a lot of vacation rentals. So there are these houses that are left unoccupied, which is tempting for a bear to break into. And people coming in from out of town who don't know that they're supposed to lock up the containers, and also don't really know the consequences. They don't know from bears, they're coming in from New Jersey or somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
and the analogy that I found really interesting, you used all kinds of imagery in the book, but something that kind of made me understand a little bit better was this concept of, you could catch a bear in the act, like you could catch a robber in the act, and then they might just panic, respond, and that's
Right.
when we have tragedy, right?
Yes.
And I kind of wanted to ask, like, how you kind of already touched on it, putting away your trash, making sure that they can't get to the human food. Are those the best solutions for avoiding a bear incident in the future?
Yeah, they are, because bears, if you don't have something they want, they're not interested in you. They're really not. They could be curious. They could be curious, but they're when they break into a house or a cabin or a garage, it's because they smell food, or they've got reason to believe that there's food there. So and it's, bears are not aggressive, and they're not, when I traveled around with this someone from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, I said, what is that like for people, if they're home when a bear breaks in? And he said, well, there's been people sitting at a dining table and the bear comes in, grabs something off the table and runs out. Some people are terrified and some people are very nonchalant, but the danger is that, say someone has a dog and the dog and the bear get into it, and the person is afraid that the dog's going to get hurt, tries to intervene, and there's something called attack redirection, which is when the bear turns its sights on you, the person. So it's similar, like you said, it's similar to somebody's at home when a burglar breaks in and somebody tries to not cooperate, or the burglar panics. The burglar has a gun. The bear doesn't have a gun, but it's got claws and teeth, and it doesn't go well for the,
right.
In either case. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, along with this, you mentioned that the longer summers means a shorter hibernation for bears. That was just one example. Were there any of climate change, actually? Was there any places you were surprised to see climate change popping up throughout your book?
Well, yeah, that one I hadn't really thought about, but when there's a documented relationship between, the temperature goes up 2 degrees, means 1 week shorter hibernation. And that's one more week that the bears are all out on the land looking for food, coming into contact with people. So there are going to be more of these conflicts. There was another, I didn't have climate change front and center in my head, but it just seemed like every time you turn around, there's some element of it. There was I was in New Zealand, where New Zealand has an interesting relationship with its wildlife, because it's got a number of invasive species that were actually brought in to deal with other problem animals that had been imported. And now these animals have been killing birds, flightless birds that evolved without predators. So they don't fly because they didn't need to, and now they need to and they can't. So, but yeah, but anyway, so I was out on the Otago Peninsula where there's this really exotic, beautiful penguin called the yellow-eyed penguin, which it's one of those birds where you're like, why did you name it yellow-eyed when it's actually like this crazy, like Flash Gordon streak coming off, I guess, off on the sides of the head. I don't know what you would call it, the yellow,
right? A makeup
Flash Gordon streak.
something.
Yeah, like David Bowie in the 70s. It's a just gorgeous bird. And it is being, the stoats, which were the imported invasive species that have been responsible for some of these killings of bird life. The stoats are, they are doing some of that, but the other thing going on when you talk to people in the area, naturalists, there we go. Nicely done. There's the stoat. This is an example of the sort of anti-stoat propaganda. Like they're always posed in every national park, like gift shop or museum. There'll be some taxidermied stoat looking really, really vicious, standing over often a wild animal. This appears to be someone's chicken. Anyway, I just thought that was a particularly good evil stoat propaganda image. But the other thing going on, even though stoats are, there's a lot of encouragement to hate stoats and trap them in New Zealand. The other thing going on is that these penguins fish for a living. They go out every morning, kind of like it's their job, kind of waddle out to the ocean and they're out fishing. And what's happened as the waters have heated up, the fish that they eat have gone further out and deeper to be in the cooler water that they need to survive. So the penguins have tried to follow them, and they can't dive as deep as some of these fish are going to be in that cooler water. So that was another example of climate change making life more complicated for animals and for people. But it's kind of everywhere. I didn't seek it out, but I did come upon it.
Well, the last time you were on the National Writers Series, it was a request from viewers of like, maybe you should do climate change next. So it was kind of funny that it did appear in the book a little bit. Along with, I mean, a lot of people also wanted you to do animals. So I think that you did manage to, you met some expectations there. Now, as far as
am I wearing the gorilla hands in that image? That's Ben Bush, and he brought out in the middle of, he wanted me to read, and then he goes, but you have to wear these, and it was these big hairy gorilla hands. Anyway,
it would have been fitting for this this book in particular, because you did have so many animals. I was amazed by the amount of animals that you were able to fit in this book. I felt like every chapter I was going to my boyfriend and being like, this one's about elephants, and then I would just go on a giant tangent. And with these like larger animals, you talked a lot about their role in India in religion, and how, but I also was wondering if it's easier to kind of, easier is not really the right word, but to accept damage and losses when it's caused by this larger like force of nature. Like, how can you really, so it's kind of like, is this, I guess this is part of our life. Like, what do you think about, do you think that is the case?
Well, it was definitely the case with elephants. This is an image this is a woman named Padma who works on a tea estate. And she was showing, that's the researcher Dipanjan Naha on the left there. And she was showing us where an elephant had knocked over the wall to get into, she has a small bodega where she sells grains to people who work in the tea estate. She sells to the community. And it's the second or third time an elephant has broken in. And I said to her, do you feel angry? Do you want someone to come and destroy the elephant? And she said, why would you kill a god? Because of course the elephant in Hinduism is represented as Ganesh, the elephant god. But I think, it's also, I think that it's just sort of more broadly, because Hinduism has all of these, a lot of the gods, they're either animals or Basil is a deity. they're either, the spouse is an animal, or they themselves are represented as an animal, or they're riding on an animal. So it's kind of built into the everyday religion, which so many people there belong to, that they have this beautiful relationship with nature. And that was pointed out to me by someone there. It wasn't just me, deciding that. It was something people would mention. And she had a certain amount of anger for the people who run the tea estate and who are supposed to compensate her for this. And similarly, if someone's family member is killed by an elephant in India, the government is supposed to, because this is government land, the elephants are wild, they're not on someone's property. So the government is supposed to compensate the families, and they often are late to do it. So people may be angry at the government for, not paying them in a timely manner, or the tea estate people not having paid her at all. But their anger is not so much for the elephant, although that changes if somebody's, for example, someone's child is killed. And there's the other place I went up in the middle Himalaya, where the leopards there do prey on people, and often 41% of the time, I think, children, because they're smaller, they're easier prey. And those people are angry, and those people will take matters into their own hands and trap the leopard. And I don't know if it's because there's no leopard. If the leopard was in the ranks of a god, I don't think there's a leopard god, but I don't think that would matter. When an animal kills your child, you're angry and you want something done about it. So they will take matters into their own hands. So the researcher that I traveled with spends time trying to help people be safer. Like, telling people because school children walk back a couple kilometers at dusk along these roads where the leopards sometimes strike. So he'll encourage people to make sure that the children are walking in a group, or go and meet them and walk with them. So there's things you can do to try to be safe, or cut the brush back so the leopards around the houses, so they don't have a place to hide, and which they like to stalk hidden and then pounce. So, and that's something that is recommended here in mountain lion country as well, if people are concerned about their livestock or their pets, for that matter. I'm not sure if that was the answer to.
Well, no, we got there, and it's a good segue into, I did want to talk about the leopards. Your chapter on leopards was particularly harrowing, and nerve-wracking, and because you could kind of feel the tension, you could feel how uncomfortable everybody was with the concept of these big cats. And I understand that it was a little bit scary for you. You realized a little bit later as well, you had an incident. Can you talk about that?
Well, I did. One night I went for a walk, and it was still light, but in the mountains, the sun sets, that it dips behind a hill earlier than you expect. So it sort of took me by surprise, and I found myself walking back to the house where we were staying after sunset. The sun had, was getting dark, and I know that road is where there've been a number of attacks, because as we drove in, the researcher was kind of narrating, do you see that bus shelter? An old man was taken there 2017. Or this field here, a group of people were working together, a most audacious daytime attack. A girl was taken. So it was this mile by mile narration of grisly leopard attacks and deaths. And I sort of looked around and realized that it was dark, and I was by myself walking back. I probably went a mile, that's it. But I was a little spooked by just my own stupidity.
It was so funny because as I was reading this chapter, I started thinking about a childhood incident I had when I was like in middle school, and we had a cougar that was, because I grew up in the middle of nowhere. And so I remember my dad being really worried about this big cat. I had no idea. As an 11-year-old child, I was prime victim age. But you did say in Fuzz that mountain lions are less likely to pose that kind of threat. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. And even, mountain lions. I live in California. We have around 5,000 mountain lions. They just did a survey. or just finishing up a survey, population survey. And a decade or more will go by without a fatal mountain lion attack. I mean, sometimes there are scuffles or people are injured, but there instances where the animal intentionally attacks and kills are so rare. And that is also true in other parts of India other than this region of the Himalayas. So the chapter was really about what makes an animal a man-eater. Like what makes the species decide to change the menu? They're like, you know what, these humans, I'm going to start eating them. Mountain lions, yeah, they what happens with mountain lions, sometimes if somebody, if you see a mountain lion, the last thing you want to do is turn and run or get on your mountain bike and take off, because that triggers this kind of almost reflexive predator-prey response. If you run, it runs after you. So you want to like just look big, back away quietly, and be, just be something, not a threat, but also not an easy target. Don't run away.
Right.
But go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to ask a little bit about keep on moving forward, talking a little bit about the greenery that you included in your book about wildlife. You included a chapter on trees and beans. And I was curious, what made you think to even include these topics in your book?
Well, I'll tell you why. That is partly because this book was originally called Animal, Vegetable, Criminal, which is a title I quite liked. Play on animal, vegetable, mineral. And I kind of wrote the book around this title, in that there had to be some vegetable material in there. So I had the danger trees. I quite liked the danger trees anyway. Just the idea that there would be such a thing as a danger tree. Danger tree. It's kind of like there we go. That there is not a cow pie, although it looks like it. That is a conch, which is the outward manifestation of a lot of interior rot on a tree. So if you see that conch sticking out of the trunk of that is probably I don't know if that's a Douglas fir. This is a Macmillan Grove up in BC, which is sort of a stand of legacy trees, very old and very beautiful and somewhat dangerous, some of them. Anyway, if you see a conch, that's a sign that the interior is quite rotted out, and that tree could, in a high wind or an ice storm, kill someone. So there are danger tree assessors. This tree, I believe this guy had been monitoring for about 12 years, just checking in. He comes in, he kind of like taps on it, figures out what's, how rotten does it sound. I mean, that might have been one they were taking action on. I'm not sure, but the conch is a sign that is an unstable tree. Anyway, but then I turned the book in, and my editor said, Mary, your title is Animal, Vegetable, Criminal. You don't have any vegetables in here. She was being very literal. I was like, it just means nature, Jill. She's like, no, I think you need some more vegetable material. So, and this was after COVID had hit, so I couldn't go anywhere. So I did this chapter called The Terror Beans, which has to do with the castor beans, which from which you get ricin, which is a very, very deadly poison if it is injected or inhaled in the right size particles, and abrin, which comes from this little very beautiful, it's called a rosary pea. And I have a couple rosary peas. I've had them sitting on my desk. I got them in Trinidad on a nature walk. And when I was poking around looking for material on criminal vegetable matter, I read about abrin and the rosary pea. And I was like, my God, I have these incredibly deadly items, little beautiful as they are, sitting on my desk, and the grandkid could come over and they could have swallowed them. So I went down that rabbit hole of ricin and abrin and various elements, various aspects of that we don't have to get into here. But anyway, that's why the beans are in the book.
I see.
And then fast forward to February of this year, and Mark Bittman, who is a food writer for the New York Times and a cookbook author, very successful, he put out a history of food called Animal Vegetable Junk. So I got an email from my editor saying, I think we have to change the name. Mm-hmm. So we did change the name.
You wrote the chapter on beans during the pandemic. Was anything else influenced, or did anything kind of change after March of 2020?
I was so lucky that almost all of the reporting was done. I mean, the book was mostly written at that point. There was one chapter I was going to report up in Toronto that had to do with raccoons, but I just canceled it. So I don't know what I would have done. I don't know how anybody managed to report a book. I mean, I go somewhere for most chapters. I like to report, on the scene. I want to be kind of immersed in whatever world I'm talking about. I'm going to be writing about. So I couldn't have done that. It would have been a mess. I would have been a mess. As it was, I had some projects that I could work on that didn't require going anywhere, but what a disaster that would have been.
Right. And I remember early on in the leopard chapter, you talked about the theory that, the cats developed a taste for meat because humans were not doing a great job of taking care of human remains during 1918. And so when I saw that, it was like, oh, she must have been working on this as everything was evolving.
No, I had no idea at that point. COVID had not materialized. That was an interesting story. People trying to speculate on why these animals in this region had become man killers, as they say. And the idea put forth by Jim Corbett, who's a hunter who was brought in to kill one of these serial man killers. He believed that during the pandemic, the flu pandemic, there were so many people dying so quickly that they just didn't have time to do the traditional bringing the body down to the Ganges for cremation there, which is a long trek from that region. I mean, it's a very steep, long climb down to the Ganges. So they had a kind of expedited version of that, where they would just put a coal in the mouth and then sort of roll the body down toward the river. But that was Jim Corbett's theory, that there was so many bodies lying around, and a leopard will scavenge. I mean, they mostly kill live prey, but they will scavenge, and he believed that they perhaps developed a taste for human flesh at that point, which is, who knows? You kind of have to ask the leopards.
Right. This National Writers Series conversation with author Mary Roach is being simulcast on Zoom and IPR News Radio. If you would like to participate by submitting questions, you can register online at nationalwritersseries.org. So now, Mary, one of the things that definitely struck me by your writing, it was personable. It felt like we were in the room with you, but also you don't shy away from profanity. And I was just curious, when do you decide to sprinkle in 4 letter words? What makes you decide? I'm just gonna tell them like it is.
I'm trying to remember what. Maybe the S word.
No, you said it was a lot of rats, but there was a expletive.
Oh yeah, there was an F word there. Well, you know what? I actually. I do shy away from it, because that creates a situation where when you do use it, it just has so much more power.
Right.
There wasn't another. There was only one F word, right?
Right. That was just the one.
Yeah.
That was just the one.
Yeah. It just, and I actually thought about taking it out, and I kind of thought my editor might say, "Do we need this?" But I do, used sparingly. There is nothing like the F word.
To remind people what's what.
Yes.
Now, along with that, science can be seen by some people as dry, but like reading the description, particularly about the moose Volvo study with like the nuance that they had to get, I thought that that was so funny. And it made me think, like, what do you wish more people understood about science?
Yes. Okay. Science. Well, I myself, when I was in high school and college, thought of science as, first of all, a grind and not interesting and something to be avoided. I also thought, oh, it's not creative. I want to do something creative, so I was like, I didn't even consider science. And I've come to realize how idiotic that is. I mean, you think of even, so, okay, what's like the hardest, most avoided by liberal arts major science? I would say engineering, but engineering is so creative. I mean, when I worked on Hacking for Mars, just talking to people about how they had to completely rethink a toilet, for example. Like nothing works the way, if you take away gravity, nothing works. You have to rethink everything. And so you're thinking outside the box, you're creatively problem solving. A lot of times you're traveling to exotic places. I think I had it completely wrong. I really did. I think that people who make the choice to go into science have endlessly interesting and challenging careers. I mean, academics would be tough, I guess. It's a little competitive, and I mean, but science itself, as a career, seems to me to just be really gratifying and endlessly changing and interesting. But I had this idea that it's boring, but so anyway, I hope that I, with my books, can kind of change people's minds, especially young readers. Every now and then someone will come up to me at a book event, signing, and say, oh, I'm in medical school now, and I got interested when I read your book Stiff in high school. And I have to get up and hug them because I'm just so thrilled to hear that. That's the greatest thing about what I do, I think, is when you have brought somebody into a world that they now are in love with, that's so yeah, science is pretty cool. And takes a beating these days.
That and you did mention during the last National Writers Series, you had said you were concerned about the way people were viewing people's lack of trust regarding science. And I just was wondering if, how have you felt over the last year, I guess?
Depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Depressed and kind of hopeless in a way, because I feel like since I was there for the National Writers Series, things have only gotten so much worse. I mean, just as COVID has demonstrated, and it seems like we've just lost this basic agreement that you don't lie. It used to be, it's like you could know places to turn to where the truth would be told. And now there are people turning to places that they think is the truth. And it's so far from the truth. And it's so discouraging because it's so hard to change minds, anyone's mind. People live in the culture that they live in and are surrounded by the people they're surrounded by, and they believe certain things, and there's no way in. There's no way to, I don't know how you fix this. So it's been really depressing for me, for everybody, I think.
Right. Yeah. Certainly, I know a lot of people have been, myself included. It's been a hard year for a lot of people. Now, in describing the chapter on, this one was about vultures, and you were talking about using an effigy to keep away other birds. And, this National Wildlife Research Center person had said, well, you're just anthropomorphizing them. And I was just wondering if you'd fallen, did you find yourself, there's the effigy. Did you find yourself falling into that trap of treating animals like humans more as you were writing this book?
Yeah. Well, not partly because as a writer and a person who writes in a very non-technical way, I occasionally sort of stepped into that business of kind of putting in italics what they might be thinking, just, like at one point I'm talking about the possums in New Zealand, which are an invasive species that New Zealand is trying to exterminate. And you look at these possums and the possums in New Zealand are very cute. You look at these guys and you sort of, my husband was doing this. It's like, why, in the voice of the possum, why do they hate us? We give them the nice fluff for their gloves. They make possum wool gloves there. Just this, it's really hard not to, as a writer, I think, just especially someone who tries to be funny. So yeah, I think I did that, and I'm not proud of it.
Think that, I mean, what are the concerns with doing that towards animals, I guess, with treating them?
Well, I think that you, by anthropomorphizing, you are turning a blind eye to what their behavior really means. It's like I had a chapter in Packing for Mars about space chimps, Ham and Enos. And there's the famous picture of Ham where he appears to be grinning. And people are like, oh, he's having a good time. Well, okay, if you understand chimps, that's a stressed out monkey. That's a very unhappy animal. I mean, it's a grimace, it's not a grin. So I think we obfuscate what's really going on with them and misunderstand them. So it's lazy, I think.
I see. Okay. Now I wanted to bring up the footnotes as well. You did a great job of including these wonderful footnotes that I could not imagine reading the book without. It really does. It feels like every time, oh, well, she's covering it all. And then you get all of this additional information in your footnotes. But I was wondering, have you had to cut something from your books that you wanted to include, or do you just use your footnotes as an excuse to include it all?
I definitely use my footnotes as an excuse to include it all. Yeah, there's stuff in there that has no place in that book. There's a very, very long, indulgent footnote about the CIA medical people and their efforts to capture the crap of heads of state to see if they could glean something about it. And it's partly because of Adam Savage. I did an event with him years ago, and he asked on stage, it was for Gulp, with the book Gulp, and he said, is this true that they did that? And I couldn't answer the question. I said, I will find that out for you. So fast forward many years later, I found someone who'd written a paper on that. And I said, I'm putting it in. I'm just putting it in. I know it doesn't really belong in this book. So yeah, it kills me to leave something out that's fun, even if it doesn't really belong there. But my file cabinet is always full of folders of stuff that I thought I was going to include, and it didn't fit. So there's definitely stuff on the cutting room floor for sure.
Now, how do you balance using common language to express like accuracy when it comes to science, right? Because even like I will sometimes trying to like navigate press releases and go like, how can I make this understandable to just a listener?
Yes.
What is your process of doing that, or have you struggled with that?
Yeah, it's always hard when the science is difficult. I think that the time that I struggled with that in this book was in there's a chapter that had to do with gene drives, which is kind of a form of extreme birth control for animals that overpopulous animals and animals that are causing problems. Gene drive it's not being used at the moment for that purpose. But anyway, I wanted to try and explain how one would do it. And I'd have no background in genetics, and I can't assume that all my readers do. So trying to explain, like, how does CRISPR work? Simply, I was at this meeting with these geneticists. And so what I ended up doing is just making my inability to understand like kind of part of the process. So in a way, kind of like taking the reader by the hand and saying, I don't understand this either. I don't know what these people are talking about either. but I'm gonna try to figure it out. And so because you can't do, as a nonfiction writer, one of the things I admire about, say, someone like Bill Bryson is that he has a very noticeable tone. You feel like you know him and you're there with him. And when he gets to the part where he's explaining things, he keeps that tone. He doesn't go into science talk, or he doesn't start using 5-syllable words, which sometimes you see sometimes writers will do that, or when it comes time to explain the science, they'll just quote the scientist. And he's like, you know what, that didn't work. I don't know what that, just because the scientist said it doesn't mean we understand it. You have to understand it so you can express it in your own simpler way, right? So that I think I sent that passage to the researcher at the National Wildlife Research Center, and I think it went back and forth 3 times. She was very patient, a very patient woman.
I mean, CRISPR, it's not elementary science, so it's understandable.
No, it's true.
You did a lot of traveling for this book. You were all over, from India, and you even went to the Vatican to try to talk to the Pope. Were there any conversations that were intimidating for you?
The Pope would have been very intimidating had I managed to score an interview with the Pope. I did not. I was going to be there anyway for this situation going on with gulls at St. Peter's Square. And I thought, well, while I'm there, I'll try to get an audience with the Pope. And I didn't, but I made some, I had a connection with the Catholic News Service reporter who was great. She's like, I know someone in the special projects, which is where filmmakers and documentary makers have to work with this department. But I wasn't, there we are. There's the floral display before the gulls messed it up. Actually, they didn't mess it up. That's the year I was there. So the laser scarecrow was there. But anyway, that's just like a quarter of the floral display at St. Peter's on Easter. Anyway, so I thought while I was there for the gulls attacking the flowers scenario, I would talk to people. I would talk to the Pope, this Pope, Francis, his kind of, I don't know if it's not really a patron saint, but his namesake is Francis of Assisi, who is a big booster he's kind of like the OG animal activist, and Pope Francis has written beautifully. He has this encyclical writing about respect for the earth, and he's kind of the environmental Pope. So I thought it would be interesting to talk to him about this, but of course I couldn't get near the Pope. But I did manage to get into the Vatican, and I spent some time with someone at the Pontifical Academy for Life, which is the ethics arm of the Vatican. And I think they weren't necessarily expecting to talk about rats and whether it's okay to kill them, but he was very patient, this guy, Father Carlo Casalone, who's a bioethicist, and he had a train to catch. And I think he was like, please let the time pass so I could get out the door. And I mean, he said he had a train to catch. I think maybe he was just tired of talking to me, but he was very patient, and he was a wise man. But it's not like he had any special expertise when it comes to the ethics of human-wildlife conflict. But it was an interesting conversation. But I wouldn't say I was intimidated. He wasn't an intimidating man. The Pope would have probably been more intimidating.
Sure. Now I've got a couple more questions, and then I'm going to start opening it up to our listeners. And if you'd like to participate in the conversation, you can do so by registering online at nationalwriterseries.org. This National Writer Series conversation with author Mary Roach is being simulcast on Zoom and IPR News Radio. So you can listen to it live on the radio, or if you registered, you're listening to it via Zoom. So thank you for joining us. And then, so I just wanted to ask a couple more questions. First of all, early on in the book, you described pulling out a decibel meter to see how loud somebody was talking. And, it's these details, these descriptions that really make us feel so much like we're in the room with you. How do you decide what details to include in your writing?
I
Or is it just like as you're going along, you're just writing for us?
I think that the decibel meter was a way for me to show people what Kevin Van Dam, I think his name was Kevin Van Dam. But instead of saying he speaks loudly, he has a loud voice. It was a way for me to bring that to life. The guy was, I forget the decibel number, but when I looked up decibel levels of household appliance, it's like a garbage compactor. That's how loud. And you could hear him at the back of the room. He didn't have a microphone. He just had a very strong voice. He wasn't shouting. He's just a man who talks loudly. So, and I just have a habit of taking out the decibel meter sometimes. I'm just curious sometimes. I don't know. I just love that app.
Well, and can you tell people where it came from as well? Because I understand it started with one of your other books.
Yes, it started with Grunt. There's a chapter about hearing loss in the military, which is the number one Veterans Administration expense, because you're around a lot of loud things, not just guns and bombs, but armored personnel carriers that are very, very loud, and you're in them for hours at a time. And hearing loss has to do not only with the decibel level, but how long are you exposed? So I was doing the deep dive into hearing and decibels and hearing damage and hearing loss. And so at that point had downloaded the decibel meter onto my phone. And now I feel like, doesn't everybody have a decibel meter on their phone? Is that weird?
Maybe I will get one now. I've never thought during a conversation, but maybe I will now. Like, how loud is this person actually talking? Maybe I'll get it out for myself. Okay, so last question for me, and then I'm going to pull some questions from listeners. Now, you've said that it was your involvement in the Artist Grotto in San Francisco, that the Writers Grotto, that helped you publish your first book. Now, can you tell me a little bit about what it means to be surrounded by a community of artists, especially when you're starting out?
Sure. Yeah. Before I joined the Writers Grotto, I was doing entirely shorter pieces, magazine piece features and columns. And I enjoyed that. And I kind of was intimidated by the idea of writing a book. And then I joined the Writers Grotto, and most of the people there were writing books. And so first of all, it made me realize this is something people do. It's not, it kind of demystified it. I could see what they were doing and how they were doing it. They were encouraging. People were very encouraging. Also, people are willing and happy to share agents, to share advice. Editors, it's a very supportive community. If somebody's looking for an editor, if somebody's looking for a place to publish a piece, I mean, they're just myriad ways that writers can help each other. And so and it's a mix. The place I'm in now, I'm in another communal workspace, and we have fiction writers, we have nonfiction book writers, we have magazine people, podcasters, radio producers. So it's there's a lot of cross-pollination that goes on, and it's also nice to be around other people. Writing can be a very solitary pursuit. Not the reporting part of it, but the writing part of it. Having done that on my own for many years, it is isolating. So it's just great to be around people who are doing similar things and people that you like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that being said, I'm going to start taking a few questions from our audience. David asks, we hear a lot about invasive species affecting the U.S. Have you seen invasive species doing damage in foreign ecosystems?
Yes. I spent time in New Zealand, who have a quite radical approach. Well, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. New Zealand has issues with stoats, possums, and rats in particular, which are killing not only the flightless birds, but some of the birds that can fly, and also many reptile species. So there's been a lot of extinctions. And so the country has decided to make an effort. The program is called Predator Free New Zealand 2050. And the idea is to eliminate these 3 predators from those islands entirely by 2050, which is quite an ambitious and quite a radical approach, but they're committed to doing that. I don't know whether they will. There are those who doubt that they will. It's very expensive. So yes, that and the guy at the Vatican, the bioethicist, was talking about there was, I think it was some kind of deer that was causing problems, and they reintroduced wolves in the region to lower the deer population, and then the wolves did really well, and then the people with livestock started complaining. So, it's very rare that kind of thing goes according to how you expect it to go. There's the famous case of the mongooses in Hawaii that were brought in for the rats in the sugarcane fields, I believe, and somebody wasn't thinking about was one species is diurnal, one is nocturnal. So the rats, the mongooses were kind of like, yeah, I've heard there's rats here. I never see them. See, there I go, anthropomorphizing again.
I mean, it's with their cute faces. Now, Ken asks about your photographs that you included in the book. He says that they were very strong in complimenting. Did you pick the photos, or did somebody collaborate with you?
Oh, thank you for asking. That is one of my favorite parts of the process. I've done that for every book since Stiff, and this is book number 7. And it's been different people. It's a collaboration between myself and somebody at W.W. Norton, my publishing company. And the photographs are not literal. They're well, sometimes they are. Like the leopard is a leopard, the leopard chapter. But often they're kind of they may be a little abstract, or they're kind of a humorous take. They're kind of setting the tone a little bit. But, we know it when we see it. So it's a lot of time spent on Getty and Corbis, those stock photo, which have some amazing keyword search functions. You can put in leopard and goofy, you could put in thing, and it will, or bear and humorous, you can narrow the search in kind of amazing ways. So it's a very, very fun process.
Good. So you are listening to this National Writers Series event on IPR and Zoom. You're welcome to leave your questions in the comments. I also wanted to, the information about deer, growing up in northern Michigan in the Manistee National Forest, I empathized a lot with the people that hit deer, because I've hit a lot of deer in my life. And we even had a deer whistle on our van that we would drive, and we would swear like we're attracting the deer. We're not.
They don't work. Yeah.
No, but you did mention there is something that's seeing a little bit of success. Can you tell the Michigan listeners?
Oh, sure. This is something developed by researchers at the National Wildlife Research Center. And Travis DeVault is the researcher. He's no longer with NWRC, but here's what it is, and it's particularly useful at night. The situation with deer and vehicles, or many animals and vehicles, is that they're not good at predicting how quickly they need to get out of the way. They're very good at that with their own natural predators, because they evolved alongside these predators. So they're very good at like, okay, I've got another 2 seconds before I have to bolt. But they can't deal with a car going 50 or 60 miles an hour. And so they get hit. And what's even harder is at night, when the deer see 2 pinpoints of light, they don't see the vehicle getting bigger, which is how you know it's coming at you and how you judge how fast it's coming at you. Because the pinpoints of light, it's hard to see that they're looming. So the deer stand there in the headlights. So what this is, it's an aftermarket, it's a light bar that illuminates, it faces the grille of the automobile, so it illuminates the front of the car or truck. So now the animal can see, oh, that is in fact a vehicle, and it is approaching. It's getting bigger, it's approaching. So it helps them to realize what's going on, because they seem to just look at the lights and go, huh, what are those two lights? I don't know. They're, boom, you know, that scenario. So they've just patented this, and we'll see if it ends up something that people are using. And I was there while they were doing some gathering data, which meant going out in Travis's truck at night and driving at deer, not hitting them. We didn't know deer were harmed. But seeing, just comparing with and without the light bar, how quickly did they get out of the way? And it seems to help. So there you go. Possibly because the whistles don't work.
No, they didn't work at all.
No, neither does the white thing that's supposed to look like, well, there was like, never mind. It's in the book. There's lots of hilarious things people have tried.
I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up here if we don't have any other questions, but I did want to ask a final question. As you near the end of your book, you have your own personal coexistence challenge that you have to reckon with, I guess. And I was kind of curious, where is the line between coexistence and then preventing danger or disease, or are they the same, I guess?
Well, you're talking about the roof rat.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between a roof rat or two or three that run around a neighborhood because people have fruit trees and other things that appeal to them, and an infestation of rats, say, in a structure that's not secure, where the rats are getting in, like was the situation with the plague, and you see that also in like homeless encampments, because the people who live there don't have a place to keep food secure. There's a lot of opportunities for rats, and rats breed really quickly. And so you have to keep on top of that. And the health department regularly samples those rats to make sure that they don't have disease. And once they find any kind of disease, they go in and clear out that encampment, because it's a disease, is a risk of disease to the people who are living there. So I'm not advocating for anybody allowing infestations of rodents. I mean, usually it's a problem with, a porous living structure, like a warehouse that's not secure, or a house that is old and rickety, or a homeless encampment. And in that case, you have to, it's a health risk. A few roof rats running around is different. I mean, you keep them out of your attic, they're not going to harm you. There's more people. I mean, you could get the same diseases from the squirrels in your backyard. There's really no difference between the two, except that they have that horrible word rat attached to them. And that's why we freak out.
The concept can be applied to those larger megafauna then?
That's tough, because like I was mentioning before, should something happen and somebody, say an agency, and this has happened, where an agency says, there's a bear in this community and we've had calls, but we're going to just monitor the situation. And then a girl was mauled on a campsite and killed, and the family sued. So there's a liability issue because I was like, airlines fly, even though people are killed every now and then. But the difference is that airlines they generate income so that people can afford the insurance and the payouts when something horrible happens. And bears don't really generate. A bear in a community is just a liability and a possible safety hazard. So it's tricky. I mean, I think that, but there are already people in places where there are bears who won't call them in. They won't call the state agency. They'll call, like around here, we have there's a bear advocacy group, but you can call them. I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head, but you can call them and they will come and, roust the bear from under your deck and help you to seal off the space where the bears are getting in. And so, which is, practicing exclusion, as they say. So and there's a demand for that. People don't want these animals put down, so they will get help to sort of bear proof their environment and be educated about it. So I think that the push from the public, I think that people are going to demand that that not demand, but they're not going to avail themselves of the lethal options if they can coexist. I mean, there's I can't speak for everybody, but a lot of people, I think, appreciate bears and want them around and don't want them to be killed. So
absolutely. We have a couple more listener questions, and one of them was kind of plays into that exclusion thing of like, what role do you see, this is from Allison, what role do you see government playing in facilitating our relationships with these criminals? And what are good examples of a program that works? And so exclusion is kind of one of those examples. Are there any others as well?
The Humane Society of the United States has and I have in the back of the book some resources for people, and one of them is this, and PETA has one as well. It's a web page that goes species by species, and it has suggestions for people of how to deal with this themselves instead of calling, say, Wildlife Services, which is the USDA's kind of animal police organization. But one thing I would say is that the climate is kind of shifting at Wildlife Services. There's been in 12 states in the United States, there's been a lot of money set aside for hiring non-lethal specialists. And these are states with wolves in particular. So hiring people whose area of expertise is non-lethal solutions for these conflicts. Not just sort of paying lip service to, oh, why don't you build a safe, a more a stronger and better nighttime enclosure for your livestock or your pets, but actually like helping do that and telling people how to do it and doing it, or range riders to ride with people's stock and look out for, like, is there a wolf den nearby? Let's move the animals away, or there's safer grazing practices that can be put into effect. So there's been hires for people actually to do these things, and that is having an effect on the kind of the culture within Wildlife Services, who over the years have been more inclined to, come in and kill at the behest of someone with livestock or someone, who has agriculture, who's trying to deal with rodents or birds. So I think that's a positive shift. And there's been also a lot of movement toward coexistence, like people, there's organizations for carnivore coexistence where people bring in folks from either side, like a 2 or 3 day gathering of people in agricultural people, ranchers, animal welfare people, conservation people, and getting them not just to talk at each other, but to actually listen and to talk about compromise and solutions. And so there are some promising things going on.
Now, Jason asks, whatever happened to Esteban? Did you ever find out if he was okay?
Yeah, Esteban. I don't know. Esteban, I should check back in because I don't know. I'm guessing Esteban, I should say, is somebody who was looking into the safety of lasers, or green lasers in certain in the evening. Well, there's also red lasers, but for scaring away birds, and that was what was going on at the Vatican. And he was looking at, are these safe for birds' eyes? Are we going to harm the eyes of these birds? And so he had not published his paper yet, and he talked to me about it, but he's like, it hasn't been published yet, so I can't give you any details, but check back. And then I'm not sure I don't know what happened, but he had joked, like, if you stop hearing from me, you'll know what happened. The laser people have a lot of money invested in this. Yeah, good question. I should reach out to him, make sure he's okay.
The Mateus asks a couple of questions. They're asking if you can still buy the extra Fuzz patches, And if you have
yes. Here, I'll
Yes.
show you. Here they are, the Fuzz patch. You know what? They have them, I'm told, in this month at Barnes and Noble in the stores. So you might want to call around. The one independent bookstore promotion with these is over. But yeah, they were pretty popular, the patches.
They look pretty cool, I gotta admit.
They're really cool. Yeah.
And then they were also wondering if you have a favorite research deep dive.
You know, one that entertained me was in a footnote. It was the footnote about the Great Canada Goose internet fecal smear campaign, which is to say that they're all over the internet. There are people saying the Canada goose defecates 2 to 3 pounds a day, defecates 5 pounds a day. There was one that said the Canada goose defecates twice its weight in feces every day. I'm like, that's 40 pounds of shit. A horse doesn't do that. This has got to stop. This is ridiculous. So I was trying to trace it back to like, where did this start? So that footnote was a very fun deep dive into Canada goose shit.
Awesome. Well, it's been lovely to talk to you, Mary Roach. The last question I'm going to ask is, what's next?
Oh, I can't talk about it yet because I haven't even sold it. A book.
Perfect. We will all be waiting for that. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting topic. It's been a delight to get to know about you and read your book and get to talk about the ways that human and wildlife, we're interconnected in such a way I never would have known. And thank you so much for bringing this information to us and taking the time for the National Writers Series.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. And thank you, Kendra, for hosting tonight. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. I know it's weird, this Zoom era, and I so am looking forward to coming back to the Opera House and meeting up with Doug and Ann again and everybody. And Jillian did such a great job. So thanks to everybody. Thanks for having me again.
And I'm Kendra Carr. This has been a special presentation of the National Writers Series, simulcast on Zoom and Interlochen Public Radio.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you'll all continue the conversation by purchasing a copy of Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law, from your favorite independent bookstore. Thank you again to our donors and major supporters: Cordia, West Shore Bank, the Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network, literary sponsor Becky Thatcher Designs, Interlochen Public Radio, and the Traverse City Record Eagle. This event is also made possible in part by the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts. And thank you to you, our viewers. Your support makes all the difference, and the proceeds of our events help to fund our Raising Writers programs, which share the love of reading and writing. Thank you, and good night.